The Jester wore bells and motley, but his stage was more dangerous than any battlefield. One joke could win him favour, one wrong word could cost him his head. Imagine standing before a king mocking the most powerful man alive, knowing your laughter was both your shield and your noose. Was the fool truly free, or just a man dancing on the edge of a sword? Welcome to Vale of the Middle Ages, where we uncover the truths hidden behind the laughter, blood and shadows of medieval life. Long before the medieval jester danced into the courts of Europe, the idea of laughter as survival had already taken root in civilizations across the world. In ancient Rome, comic actors filled the streets and theatres, satirizing daily life and mocking the powerful with wit so sharp it sometimes drew blood. When emperors later expelled these actors, branding them corrupting influences, the performers scattered across Europe, carrying their art with them like seeds. Out of this migration grew a new kind of entertainer, the jester. But Rome was not the only cradle of folly. In China, emperors kept jesters whose jokes could sway political decisions, and in India, royal fools amused courts with a blend of storytelling, mimicry, and satire. Across cultures, the role of the fool emerged again and again, as if humanity itself could not live without that fragile balance between mockery and truth. What tied them together was not just their comedy, it was their ability to make laughter into a kind of shield against despair. By the Middle Ages, Europe was a place weighed down by hunger, plague, and endless war. Life for the common man was brutish and short. The nobility, too, lived in the constant shadow of betrayal and political intrigue. In such a world, laughter was not a luxury, it was medicine. And in the great halls of kings and lords, that medicine was administered by the fool. For peasants, laughter might come in the chaos of village festivals, where masks and plays momentarily turned the world upside down. For nobles, it came from the jester's biting jokes, slipping truth into the air where no advisor dared. If today we turn to Netflix, late-night comedians, or stand-up shows for escape, the medieval world had no such comfort. Their entertainment was raw, immediate, and often dangerous. The fool was their living theatre, their satire, their political cartoonist and comedian rolled into one. He, or sometimes she, was a walking reminder that even the highest crown could be mocked. And in moments of festivity, laughter even became ritualized. One of the most striking traditions was the Lord of Misrule, a mock king chosen during Christmas revels or other feasts. For a brief time, the social order was inverted. A servant might command his master, a peasant might order nobles to dance, and the fool often stood at the center of this chaos. It was sanctioned madness, a controlled rebellion that allowed pressure to escape from the rigid hierarchy of medieval life. Through humour and inversion, society released its tension so that, when the bells fell silent, the natural order could return unbroken. The fool, then, was never just a clown. He was a cultural necessity, born from hardship, sustained by tradition, and granted a strange authority no priest or knight could claim. His laughter was a paradox, both rebellion and obedience, both chaos and control. In his presence, the medieval world could breathe, if only for a moment. Step into the great hall of a medieval castle, and before the torches flicker against the stone walls, you hear it, the faint jingling of bells. That sound announced the arrival of the jester, a figure as colourful as the motley coat, stitched from mismatched scraps of red, green and yellow. His cap, with its 3 flopping points tipped with bells, mimicked the ears and tail of a donkey, reminding all that he was there to be mocked even as he mocked others. In his hand, he carried a bauble, a sceptre carved into a grotesque little head, often a parody of his own face. Sometimes he wielded a wooden sword or a bladder on a stick, props that looked ridiculous but somehow commanded attention. Yet it was never the costume alone that defined him. The jester's survival depended on his skills, each sharpened like weapons in an invisible arsenal. He told stories that made peasants laugh and nobles reflect, shifting his tone from lullabies for children to brutal war tales for hardened knights. He juggled knives, tumbled across the hall, mimicked courtiers in cruelly accurate voices, and played music on lutes or pipes. His greatest weapon, however, was his tongue. Quick wit, biting satire, and the ability to spin truth into jest. A single misplaced word could end his life, yet silence would make him useless. He lived perpetually on the knife's edge. The contradiction of his existence was stark. No priest, no knight, no advisor could criticize the king without fear of execution. Yet the fool could. That was the strange privilege of the bells. But while the jester had freedom to speak, that freedom was fragile. Push too far, mock the wrong scandal, reveal too much truth, and the laughter in the hall could turn to silence. And in silence, death waited. Imagine then a day in the life of such a man. Morning began not with leisure, but with practice. In a quiet chamber, he rehearsed juggling until his arms ached, replayed songs until the strings bit into his fingers, and whispered jokes to himself like spells, testing their timing and sharpness. At noon, he entered the hall where nobles feasted and drank. There he became chaos embodied, spinning, singing, mocking, and provoking laughter that rolled against the stone like thunder. He was the release valve of a tense world, the one who dared to say what others thought but never uttered. But the true weight of his role came at night. When the feasting ended and the hall emptied, he might be summoned to the king's private chamber. Gone were the pratfalls and slapstick. Now, by the glow of a single candle, the fool became something else, entirely. A confidant. He leaned close to the throne and whispered what courtiers dared not. Rumours of discontent, the mood of the people, the dangerous truths disguised as jokes. The jingle of his bells fell silent, and for a moment the most powerful man in the realm listened not to a clown, but to the only voice in his kingdom, unchained by fear. By dawn, the cycle began again. Bells jingling, body twisting, tongue ready to dance between comedy and execution. Behind the fool's painted smile was the most dangerous job of all, telling the truth in a world built on lies. The jester was more than a comic relief. He was the court's unlikeliest counsellor, the one man, or sometimes woman, who could speak truth wrapped in laughter. This power was known as the jester's privilege, the freedom to mock the king without fear of punishment. At least that was the theory. In practice, every joke was a gamble, every quip a roll of dice against death. A fool could save a monarch from arrogance with a sharp jest, or he could insult the wrong ego and vanish by morning. What made this role so vital was not the slapstick, but the satire. The jester's words often carried barbs sharper than any sword. In halls where advisers flattered and nobles bowed, the fool alone could whisper truths the king needed to hear. A single joke could diffuse anger, soften pride, or even warn of betrayal. In this way, jesters functioned as both entertainers and shadow advisors, their comedy shaping the very decisions of rulers. Beyond the walls of the castle, they played another role, messengers and carriers of rumour. Travelling fools spread stories from village to village, their ballads weaving news of battles, scandals, or politics into entertainment. In a society where most were illiterate and no printing press yet carried the written word, the fool became a living newspaper. He was the meme, the headline, the talk show, and the gossip column all at once. When he joked, people listened, not just to laugh, but to learn. Seen in this light, the jester was a form of medieval media. Like social networks today, they amplified voices, carried truths and lies alike, and swayed public opinion. Their satire was propaganda. Their tales a kind of viral storytelling that shaped how commoners saw their rulers. Yet unlike the anonymous chatter of the internet, the jester carried his entire credibility in his body and his bells. If people doubted him, he lost his livelihood. If he offended the wrong man, he lost his life. The comparison to today's late-night comedians is striking. Modern hosts joke about presidents, senators, and billionaires with a smirk that lands on millions of screens. They provoke laughter, outrage, even political change. But for them, the worst consequence is cancellation or a dip in ratings. For the medieval fool, every jest was high stakes. Their audience was not millions of viewers, but one man with the power of life and death. The joke had to hit, and hit perfectly. This razor's edge made the fool's position one of paradox. He was the weakest man in the court, dressed in mismatched scraps, mocked for his bells and antics. Yet he was also the freest, wielding a tongue that pierced through fear and flattery. He embodied the dangerous truth that sometimes the smallest voice carried the greatest power. History remembers kings and battles, but hidden in the margins are the fools, figures who wore bells and motley, yet sometimes bent the course of history. Their names and stories reveal that jesters were never just ornaments of laughter. They were weapons, confidants, and even heroes. Take the Norman dwarf Tarloffer, for instance. During the Battle of Hastings in 1066, when William the Conqueror's army faltered against the English shield wall, Tarloffer rode forward alone. Singing the epic song of Roland while juggling his sword, he taunted the English. His reckless antics drew one soldier out of formation, and in that fatal opening, Tarloffer struck, decapitating the man before charging into the lines. His performance turned the tide, rallying the French, distracting the enemy and helping William claim a kingdom. A fool, yes, but one whose courage reshaped England forever. Then there was Roland the Farter, court jester to Henry II of England in the 12th century. His act was simple, even crude. A simultaneous leap, whistle, and fart performed each Christmas. Yet it delighted the king so much that Roland was rewarded with land, wealth, and a manor of 30 acres. To the modern mind it seems absurd, but it shows the strange currency of laughter in an age where humour could earn riches equal to knights and lords. Far beyond Europe, in 10th century China, Shen Giangoa, whose nickname meant gradually stretching taller, proved that jesters could wield influence far beyond jokes. He once quipped that even the rain was too afraid of the emperor's taxes, refusing to fall. Amused, the emperor immediately lowered the tax burden during a devastating drought. Shen later saved his master's life by drinking poisoned wine meant for the throne, sacrificing himself in the name of loyalty. A jester, yes, but one whose death carried more nobility than many generals. And then the women who broke boundaries. In a world where women were treated as property, a handful rose as fools. They dressed in bright gowns, cracked jokes at court, and travelled with queens. One female fool in Edward II's court famously rode into Westminster Hall on horseback, entertaining the king and his nobles before delivering a secret petition of complaint against royal favouritism. Wrapped in jest, her message pierced deeper than any knight's sword. She dared where no courtier would. Yet for all these tales, there is another story. One lost to time, but easy to imagine. Picture a medieval courtroom, a peasant dragged before his lord accused of theft. His eyes are hollow with hunger, his body thin from endless winters. The nobles are eager to condemn him, to make an example. But from the corner of the hall comes the jingle of bells. The jester steps forward. He bows, grins, and in a mocking tone says, "My lord, if stealing bread is the crime, then I fear the whole village must hang, for hunger is the only thief that haunts us all." Laughter ripples through the hall. The lord, forced to mask his anger, cannot punish truth spoken through folly. The peasant is spared not by law or mercy, but by a fool's courage. This is the paradox of the jester. He was the clown, the plaything, the object of ridicule. Yet at times, he was also the conscience of kings, the rescuer of innocence, and the rare voice of humanity in a brutal age. He could be hero and victim, manipulator and martyr, mocked by society, yet wielding a power no knight in armour could ever claim. Though the motley coats and jingling bells have long faded into history, the legacy of the medieval jester still lingers in our culture. His spirit lives on in the theatre, where actors and satirists skewer hypocrisy under the cover of comedy. He is echoed in the rhythm of stand-up comedians who turn personal pain and political scandal into punchlines. And he remains present in the halls of power, where humour, irony and parody still work as the sharpest weapons against pride and tyranny. A fool's smile, after all, could hide a blade sharper than any knight's sword. Behind the painted grin was truth, masked, twisted, but undeniable. The medieval jester proved that laughter could topple arrogance more effectively than armies, and that a jest, once spoken, could not be unsaid. This is the inheritance he left us, the knowledge that humour is not just entertainment, but resistance. Even now, in a world flooded with screens and voices, jesters surround us. Late-night hosts mocking politicians, cartoonists exaggerating the faces of leaders, online satirists puncturing inflated egos. They are all descendants of the fool. Their task is the same: to remind us of truths we might ignore, to laugh at the powerful so that power does not become absolute. The difference is that modern jesters risk reputation, not execution. Their stage is global, their audience millions, but the stakes, though softened, still echo the perilous dance of their medieval predecessors. And perhaps, in an age overwhelmed by noise and misinformation, the role of the jester is more vital than ever. In the Middle Ages, he cut through the suffocating silence of fear with laughter. Today, he cuts through the deafening roar of endless information with satire. In both worlds, the fool becomes the guide, pointing to the truth hiding in plain sight. The medieval jester may be gone, but his shadow still follows us. He teaches us that ridicule is a language of freedom, that truth can survive even when disguised as folly, and that sometimes the only way to confront power is with a joke. For all his bells and tricks, he was never truly foolish. He was the voice of reason in motley clothes, the conscience disguised as chaos, and that, perhaps, is the greatest irony of all. The story of the medieval jester is a story of paradox. He was born to be mocked, dressed in rags of bright colours, his cap jingling with bells meant to remind everyone of his lowly place. Yet time and again, this figure of ridicule became the one voice that mattered most. While priests spoke in sermons and knights rattled swords, the jester dared to whisper truths in the ears of kings. He was expected to be nothing. And because of that expectation, he could be everything. The fool's life was never secure. One laugh could buy him safety, another could buy him land. But silence or the wrong jest could cost him everything. Still, the jester remained century after century, weaving humour into survival and turning folly into wisdom. He lived on the edge of a sword, balancing comedy and catastrophe, yet his legacy endured long after the feasts ended and the halls turned cold. Perhaps this is why the jester continues to fascinate us. He represents the strange truth that sometimes power is not challenged by armies or decrees, but by laughter. A single joke could pierce pride, shift politics, or even save a life. And while history remembers him as a clown, in reality he was a mirror, showing kings, nobles, and peasants alike what they truly were. So ask yourself this: if you had been a jester, would you have dared to joke about your king? Would you have risked everything on the fragile hope that your humour would save you, not destroy you? The jester's world may be gone, but the lesson remains. Never underestimate the power of laughter, nor the courage it takes to speak the truth from behind a fool's smile. Thank you for watching Veil of the Middle Ages. If you enjoy uncovering the shadows behind the laughter, don't forget to subscribe and join us every week.